So, what kind of changes can we expect as the new leadership takes office in China? It's a question I put to Stephen David. He's professor at Johns Hopkins University. I asked him if we can expect major changes or will there be more of an emphasis on continuity?
Well, we don't know. I mean, certainly it's a very scripted party Congress. We all know who the next leaders are going to be, and we have some idea of the policies, well, we think we have some idea of the policies they're going to pursue, but people surprise us. And I think there's a lot of hope and maybe some expectation that perhaps the new leadership group will be surprising.
You know, when we look at the security issues, at the opening of the Congress, Hu Jintao said that more effort must be made to develop China's maritime power. And we've just seen a major reshuffling of the top brass in the Chinese military. The man who now takes over as chief of the general staff is an admiral. What can we read from that?
Well, it's hard to say. Certainly, as China expands its power, it wishes to expand its influence. All great powers behave that way. And of course, we've seen a number of confrontations in the South China Sea with Japan, South Korea. So I think we can expect to see some problems in this area, but I don't think these problems will lead to major conflict.
You know, you mentioned problems. I just want to quote from the Chinese news agency Xinhua, which moved this report earlier this week, and it said that if the United States does not change its traditional hegemonic ways of thinking, there will be more and more conflicts as China continues to develop and protect its own interests. How do you interpret that statement?
Well, the Chinese are flexing their muscles. Again, as a rising power, they seek to have influence commensurate with their power. But we're a long way from armed conflict. Both China and the United States are nuclear-armed states. Both depend on each other tremendously economically. There's tremendous economic interdependence. Before a single shot would be fired, both economies would nearly collapse.
That statement from the Chinese news agency came as the United States is implementing what has become known here in Washington as the Asia pivot, or as the White House calls it, rebalancing, moving more of its military assets into the Asia-Pacific region, particularly naval assets. Would this be seen in China as a provocation?
I don't think it was meant to be a provocation. It was an assertion of traditional American interests that we, or the United States, is going to look out for its allies in Asia, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. And in fact, the Chinese, to a certain extent, should be reassured that if these countries can look to the United States, they won't seek to develop their own nuclear capability or their own military capabilities.
I just want to ask you one very broad question, and that is, as we see this new leadership take power in Beijing, are we likely to see any kinds of major changes insofar as China developing some new military doctrine?
Well, I think the smart money would be no major changes. Certainly in the last 10 years under Hu Jintao, it's been business as usual. And with the new leadership team, there's nothing to indicate there are going to be fundamental changes in military doctrine or economic policy or anything else. But international relations is filled with surprises. And it may well be that the new leadership team in China will surprise us as well. I mean, remember, they are confronting major internal difficulties. I mean, there are problems with the Chinese economy, there are problems in corruption, there are problems between the wealthy and the poor, the gap between these two groups. The notion that the status quo can continue indefinitely is one that I don't think is sustainable.
Stephen David talking to me earlier.